Both data and statistics are important underpinning elements whenever we are thinking about usability metrics. And in this broad section, we will have a look at how we can describe the different types of data that we may wish to collect or may vary, alongside us having a look at some of the statistical techniques that we can use to understand, to talk about that data. In this broad section, we're going to explore the topics that you can see here on the screen. We'll start off describing and talking about the different types of data that we have, and we'll use nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio data. And it's much the same concept as the type of data that we would have inside any programming language in terms of ints and chars and floats and things like that. These data, they're going to have certain types of ranges, there'll be certain types of operations that can apply to the data, and it's really quite straightforward. And after that, we'll go on then to have a look at a range of different descriptive and inferential statistics, and that's going to include things like measures of central tendency, means, medians, and modes, measures of variability, like range, variance, standard deviation, confidence intervals. We've already talked about the importance to attach measures of confidence to the findings that we derive. We'll also have a look at how we can compare means using things like be it t-tests or ANOVAs, and also then going on to look at some other types of relationship between values, be it their correlation, or if we have non-parametric data, things like a chi-squared test. Now, just before going on to in this case, we're going to describe a little bit about differential and inferential statistics, or descriptive and inferential statistics. Before doing that, I just want to pause at this point because quite often statistics is something that some students like, some students don't like. It sometimes can sort of be a measure of fear of uncertainty for individuals. All of the stuff that we'll look at in this course, it is going to be straightforward statistics. We'll have a look at what it does, why is it appropriate. We'll normally sort of cover a little bit just in terms of the operations, so you get a bit of a feel as to the measurement that it's using. However, it's going to be very easy to use. We're simply going to use Excel. We can put our data into Excel. All of the functions we've described here are available through Excel. Now that said, it is important to understand about the test and how it operates. The fact we have so many of these different types of things is really quite important, and it reflects really some of the variability in the data. So depending upon the type of data that we've collected, the sample size, how we think it is sort of distributed, these are all elements then that can affect what is the appropriate statistical tool that we should use. So there are things then that we will look at in a little bit more detail, but don't worry, as individuals who've gone through and have learned how to program, all of this is going to be very straightforward. So we'll start off in this here by just describing what both descriptive and inferential statistics are. And the names kind of give it away in this case here. So descriptive statistics, they describe the data. So when we talked about measures of central tendency, we're simply saying that if you have a sample of 20 values and you wanted to pick one value that describes that, what value would you pick? So we might pick the middle or the average value or things like that as our measure of central tendency, where they tend towards. Alongside measures of variability, so these are things that tell us how spread out the data is. Are all of the values grouped together, or are they spread over a much wider range? So that's simply those types of measurements. And if we think about it, they're really important things when we are modeling feedback that we get from users. We want to understand that, well, what's the average, the typical feedback that we receive? And across our users, well, were they all roughly of a similar mind, or was there a large variation across the users in terms of what they thought? The thing about descriptive statistics, that they let us talk about the data that we have received. Sometimes though, we'll also want to talk about not only or maybe our sample of 20 users, but all of the potential users that we have for the system. So we will want to take our small sample and reason or make inferential statements then about the wider population. And that's when you get into aspects around confidence intervals that it's really then quite important to say, well, we think that, well, we observed this for our 20 users, and we think this is going to be true for the wider population, and we can say it with 95% confidence or something like that. So inferential statistics are going to enable us to generalize, to go from our individual small sample to the whole population or a bigger sample and make predictions then about that. And as I said, really is quite important then that we do always tie this into a measure of how confident we are around that prediction. So that's all we want to talk about in this section in terms of introducing the coverage that we'll have of both data and statistics. In the next video, we're going to jump into looking at the types of data that we can have or may want to collect through our usability studies.